Okay, so I wanted to make a video about something called Yoshification. Basically what it is the fact that some of the Yoshi code still gets run for 2 frames after a Yoshi despawns. It has a ton of minor applications and a couple big applications as well. So to show you what I mean, let me pull up some memory addresses here. And actually, I'll just go ahead and pull up the whole Lua scripts. So the only things you really need to pay attention to are the first 2 bytes in the upper left corner, the real Yoshi setter and the real Yoshi byte. The real Yoshi byte is the one the game uses to decide if it should run the graphics routine for Yoshi, among other things. And the setter is the one that sets that value. The value that gets stored is the real Yoshi's slot number plus 1. So if you look, you can see Yoshi's in slot 9, so it gets set to 10. If he's in slot 8, it will be 9, etc. And it'll be 0 if there's no Yoshis loaded. Anyway, watch what happens when I despawn this Yoshi. Okay, so on this frame, Yoshi despawns, but you'll notice that neither of the 2 bytes got updated. Then 1 frame later, the real Yoshi setter finally gets cleared, and then 1 frame after that, it stores that value to the real Yoshi byte. So overall, for 2 frames after Yoshi despawns, the real Yoshi byte doesn't get updated. This means the game still runs some of the Yoshi code even though Yoshi is gone. You can't see it because it's below the camera, but this includes his graphics. So let me mention a couple other flags. The straddle flag is used to update Mario's state so that he looks like he's riding a Yoshi. So if I go ahead and just set that flag with cheats, this is what happens. Basically, he gets put into the state where he looks like he's riding Yoshi, but there's nothing there. Now, the mounted flag is used to update Yoshi's state. So if I set that flag with cheats, this happens. Basically, Yoshi teleports underneath Mario and he stops doing his idle animation. Another thing to mention is that the straddle flag prevents Yoshi from despawning. So you'll notice that if I drop into this pit, the game is smart enough not to erase Yoshi below my feet while I'm riding him. Now, if I dismount him below the level, on this frame you can see I dismount, it actually takes an extra frame for him to despawn. And that's because the check for the straddle flag happens before the straddle flag gets cleared. So even though they happen on the same frame, the check happens first. So on this frame, it passes the check, and then the straddle flag gets cleared. Then 1 frame later, it fails the check, and it actually notices that the straddle flag is cleared, and it despawns him. What's interesting is if you're riding 2 Yoshis. So I'll just double hit this block and get 2 Yoshis. Now there's 2 mounted flags to keep track of now. So I'm going to go ahead and bring up a chart. Oh, I gotta fix the capture. I hate it when it does this. There we go. Okay. So basically, if you look at the first column in this chart, this one that says C2, this basically shows all the mounted flags. So there's a mounted flag for the Yoshi in slot 8, and there's one for the Yoshi in slot 7. So if I mount the Yoshi in slot 8, you can see that flag gets set, and then the one in slot 7 gets set. And I don't need the mounted flag that I had on screen before anymore, because that's not really relevant. So now you can see the mounted flags for both Yoshis. Basically, each Yoshi has its own mounted flag, but there's only 1 straddle flag, since the straddle flag is used to update Mario's state, not Yoshi's. And because there's only 1 straddle flag, something weird happens if you dismount both Yoshis below the level. So right here, I'm going to drop into the pit, and then I'm going to dismount right here, and this happens. Okay, so I didn't use any cheats there. Basically, if you dismount 2 Yoshis below the level, okay, there's a lot to process there. So the first thing that happens is that when I press A, I guess it's on. Okay, so on this frame, I press A, and first the game checks the invisible Yoshi. Basically, it processes sprites from the highest slot to the lowest, and the invisible Yoshi is in a higher slot, so it gets processed first. So first the game checks if the straddle flag is cleared, which it's not yet since I just pressed A. Then it sees that A is pressed, so it clears the straddle flag, as well as the mounted flag for the invisible Yoshi. Then it tells Mario to warp to the invisible Yoshi's Y position as if he just dismounted him. Okay. Next it processes the real Yoshi. First, it checks if the straddle flag is cleared, and this time it is cleared because the first Yoshi cleared it. Then it sees he's below the level, so he despawns. Notice this time he despawns on the same frame you dismount, not one frame later. Not only that, but it never clears this Yoshi's mounted flag since it already despawned him. So you also never warp to his Y position, which leaves you at the Y position of the invisible Yoshi. And because this Yoshi's mounted flag never got cleared, the game sees he's still mounted and sets the straddle flag again. So you end up in this weird state where you're stuck straddling nothing and you get teleported upward. The straddle flag actually doesn't get cleared unless you properly dismount, but interestingly, the straddle flag gets cleared on every single frame if there are no Yoshis loaded in the level. The game actually checks each slot for a Yoshi and clears the straddle flag if it doesn't find any. Okay, now if you look closely, you can see what I was talking about before, right here. For 2 frames after the real Yoshi despawns, the game is still rendering him. So the Yoshi you see there is basically an after image of the Yoshi that already despawned. Not only that, but it's also still processing certain values. So, let me do that again. I'm going to go through the pipe to reset everything, and then I'm going to get 2 Yoshis again. And this time I'm going to stick out Yoshi's tongue before I drop into the pit, or before he despawns anyway. So I stick out his tongue, and then I despawn him, and you can see that this like zombie Yoshi that appears also has his tongue out, and the tongue keeps extending during these 2 frames. So actually, the game's still processing this zombie Yoshi as if he were a real Yoshi. And yes, this tongue actually works and it can latch onto things. So that's Yoshification. Basically, there was nothing in that slot, but the game Yoshified that slot and turned it into a zombie Yoshi. But what's really interesting is if something else takes his slot within those 2 frames. So I'll go ahead and show that with the reserve item. So first I'm going to fill some slots here to make sure everything lines up, and then I'm going to drop Yoshi into this pit. And 1 frame after he despawns, I'm going to release my reserve. Now, you can't make the mushroom take his slot on the same frame he despawns, because when something comes from reserve, the game checks for a free slot before despawning is processed. So even though Yoshification lasts for 2 frames, we can only Yoshify the mushroom on the 2nd frame. And on this frame, you can see the mushroom turns into a glitchy mess. Basically, it's trying to render the mushroom as if it were a Yoshi. Also, some other properties get written during this frame, but I'll get to that later. Okay, now you can do this with naturally spawning sprites too. In fact, when a sprite spawns naturally, it can actually take Yoshi's slot on the same frame Yoshi despawns, unlike the reserve box. So you can actually Yoshify it for 2 frames. So this Koopa here spawns naturally. Unfortunately, when something spawns naturally, it spawns before it comes on camera, so you can't see it during those 2 frames. Now, pay attention to the chart when this Koopa spawns. So right here, you can see the Koopa spawns, and if you look at the chart, for slot 7, all the values are zeroed out. Basically, on the frame he spawns, he goes through initialization, which clears all the values. But I can still Yoshify this Koopa, so let me go ahead and do that. So I'm going to drop Yoshi in the pit, and then on the frame that Yoshi despawns, you can see the Koopa spawns and takes his slot. So basically, I Yoshified the Koopa. Now, you can't see anything special happen because the Koopa's like off camera, so you can't see him turn into a glitchy mess. But pay attention to the values on the chart again. So, like I said, on this frame, all the values get zeroed out. But on the next frame, he's still Yoshified, because the Yoshification lasts for 2 frames. So on the next frame, you can see 1602 got updated to 4. And actually, 1570 and 1602, they both get updated for like 3 frames after Yoshi despawns. So on the next frame, you can see 1570 gets set to 2 and 1602 gets set to 0. But basically, okay, so let me explain what these values mean and what they do and stuff. So first I need to talk about miscellaneous tables. So, okay, here's a chart that shows a whole bunch of memory addresses, and what's special about these memory addresses is that they don't have one specific purpose, but different sprites use them for different things. So, for example, if we look at C2 for Yoshi, Yoshi uses C2 as I mentioned, basically a mounted flag. So 0 means not mounted, 1 means mounted, and it actually gets set to 2 when he's running around, but it's basically a mounted flag. But different sprites use them for different things. So the Koopas use C2 as a timer for flipping over a shell. The Bullet Bill uses it as like what direction it should be fired in, etc. So different sprites use them for different things. Now I'll go ahead and show you what Yoshi uses all of his miscellaneous tables for. So he uses C2 as a mounted flag, like I said. 151C is basically tongue length. This one is basically like a tongue cooldown timer. This one is like the timer for the gulping animation. This one is like a more general animation timer. This is horizontal direction. Mouth routine pointer basically tells him what to do with his mouth on a given frame. Turnaround timer, an animation frame. This basically tells him what pose to do on a certain frame. And then this one is like the mouth linked slot. So basically it tells you what, if he has something on his tongue, it will tell you what slot it's in. And if he has something in his mouth, it will tell you what slot it's in. And it gets set to 255, or FF, when there's nothing on his tongue or in his mouth. Okay, so I'm not going to show all of these on screen, but I'll show the important ones. So if you look at the chart that I have here, I have C2, which is the mounted flag. 151C is tongue length. 1570 is animation timer. 1594 is mouth routine pointer. 1602 is animation frame. And 160E is the mouth linked slot. So these are the ones that are sort of relevant for Yoshification. Most notably, the ones that I mentioned already, which are 1570 and 1602. Those ones already got updated when I Yoshified this Koopa. So let me explain what those do. So first, 1570. So let me get another Yoshi here to show you what Yoshi uses 1570 for. So he basically uses it as an animation timer. So you can see that if I start moving, I gotta find the frame where I actually start moving here. Okay, so on this frame I start moving, and you can see 1570 got set to 3. Now, then it ticks down to 0. Okay, and when it reaches 0, you can see 1602 here is 2, and then on the next frame it gets set to 0. Then 1570 gets set to 3 again, and then it ticks down to 0, and when it reaches 0, 1602 gets set to 1, and then it ticks down to 0, and 1602 gets set to 2, and then it ticks down to 0, and then 1602 gets set to 0. So basically 1602 tells him what pose to do. So you can see on this frame he has his feet together, and then on this frame he has his feet a little bit further apart, and then on this frame his feet are even further apart, and then it goes back to together again. So basically he cycles through those 3 animation frames, 0, 1, and 2. And the 1570 keeps track of how many frames he should stay in each animation frame for. Now you'll notice that while I'm moving around, sometimes it gets set to 3, sometimes it gets set to 2. So it's 3 right now, right? It got set to 3. 3, 2, 1, 0, 3, 2, 1, 0. Then when I start moving again, if I start moving a little bit faster, well, okay, right here I start moving 3, 2, 1, 0, 3, 2, 1, 0, 3, 2, 1, 0. But if I start moving faster, then it goes 2, 1, 0, 2, 1, 0, 2, 1, 0, and and then 1 0 1 0 1 0 1 0. So basically, the animation timer gets shorter the faster you're moving, which makes sense because it basically means he's going to cycle through his animation frames faster and faster the faster you're moving. So he goes through his animation cycle faster, but he's still going through the same 3 animation frames, which are 0, 1, and 2. Okay, so that's basically how 1570, 1570 and 1602 work. 1570 is an animation timer, and 1602 is the animation frame. Now, if I dismount Yoshi, you can see 1602 got set to 4. 4 is basically like his idle animation. So when he's not mounted, it gets set to 4. What's weird though is that the animation timer 1570 still gets updated even when he's idle. So you can see that even though I'm not riding him, if I start moving around, 1570 gets set to 3, and then it ticks down to 0, and then it gets set to 3 and ticks down to 0, 3 0, 3 2 1 0, 2 1 0, 2 1 0, 1 0, 1 0, 1 0. So it's still updating just like it was when I was riding Yoshi, but Yoshi's not actually using it for anything because he's in his idle animation, so he's not actually updating 1602. So I'm not really sure why the timer still gets updated. I guess it's just they probably did that on an accident. I don't really know why the animation timer is still getting updated when he's not actually using it. But for whatever reason, when you're moving around, even when you're not riding him, it still gets updated. And that's kind of important for this glitch. Now, the only time 1570 doesn't get updated while you're moving around is when Yoshi is running. So in other words, when C2 it gets set to 2. So you can see on this frame, C2 got set to 2, which means Yoshi's running now. And when Yoshi's running, you can see that 1570 doesn't get updated. It's still 0, even though I'm moving around. Whoops. So even though I'm moving around, 1570 is still 0. And you can see Yoshi's cycling through his animation frames 1 frame at a time. Like he's going 2 1 0 or 1 0. I can't speak. 0 1 2 0 1 2 0 1 2. Basically, he's cycling through his animation as fast as possible, and he's not even using the animation timer. So that's basically how Yoshi uses 1570. Now, what's interesting is that even though most sprites use 1570 as some kind of animation timer, not all sprites do. So if we look back at the chart, the most notable one, as you might have noticed on screen for a minute there, is the Sumo Brother. So 1570... Gotta find it here. Okay, 1570. Now, let me find the Sumo Brother. Okay, Sumo Bro. Counter for the number of steps taken. So basically, the Sumo Bro uses 1570 as a step counter. Now, his AI is usually that he stomps the ground and makes lightning appear. Then he takes 2 steps to the left, stomps the ground, takes 2 steps to the right, stomps the ground, takes 2 steps to the left, etc. So that's basically what he does. Now, he uses the step counter to keep track of how many steps he's taken, obviously. So when it reaches 2, it resets and then he turns around. What's interesting is that 1570 still gets updated during Yoshification, as if the new sprite were a Yoshi. So what that means is that 1570, or I guess I should say, as long as the new sprite sets C2 to 0, the address will still get updated for the new sprite instead. So I can Yoshify the Sumo Brother by spawning him right as Yoshi despawns. So I'm just going to have Yoshi run to the right here, and he's eventually going to fall in a pit. And I'm going to get close to the Sumo Brother spawn point so that right when the Yoshi despawns, or I guess 1 frame after, I'm moving to the right, and if you'll notice on this frame the Sumo Brother spawned. Now, if you look at the tables, on the frame he spawns, he zeroes out all his tables. But on the next frame, it's going to see that C2 is equal to 0, right? And because the Sumo Brother is Yoshified right now, because C2 is equal to 0, it thinks that Yoshi is not mounted because C2 is 0. But it thinks that the Sumo Brother is a Yoshi. So because the Sumo Brother is not mounted, it's still going to update 1570 because 1570 gets updated all the time, even if Yoshi's not mounted. But it's going to update it based on Mario's speed. So if Mario's moving slowly, which he is right now, it's going to set 1570 to 3. So you can see 1570 gets set to 3. Now, remember, the Sumo Brother uses 1570 as a step counter, and it's only supposed to go up to 2. So what happens when it goes up to 3? Well, basically, he just keeps moving to the left. So he's basically incrementing his step counter by 2 every time he moves. But it's supposed to stop when it reaches 2, but it started at 3. So it's just going to keep incrementing until it reaches 256 and eventually loops back around to 0. So in other words, instead of taking 2 steps, he takes 256 steps. Of course, he despawned before that happened, but eventually it would loop back around to 0, and then he would turn around. So that's just one thing you can do with this glitch, but there's some other fun things that you can modify the behavior of certain sprites. So for example, the Sumo Brothers Lightning. That's another easy one to set up. So if we go over here, you can see... well, actually, let me just look at the chart real quick. So the Sumo Brothers Lightning... 1570. Okay, so the Sumo Brother Lightning uses 1570 as a counter for the number of flames spawned. So if we look here, I'm gonna drop Yoshi in the pit, and then on the frame he despawns, you can see the lightning takes his slot. And then when it hits the ground, it spawns the wrong number of flames. Not too surprising there. Now, if you look over here, there's a goal tape, and there's a reason for that. The goal tape is another interesting one, but instead of talking about 1570, let's talk about 1602. So I already mentioned 1602 is the animation frame. And remember that when C2 is set to 0, it means Yoshi's not mounted. And when Yoshi's not mounted, it sets 1602 to 4, which is his idle animation, basically. So if we Yoshify a sprite, and that sprite sets C2 to 0, then it's going to set 1602 to 4 on the new sprite. So we can sort of... Well, I was going to say we can transfer the value, but it's a little bit... It's worth noting that you're not really transferring values from one sprite to another, because it doesn't matter what Yoshi is doing before he despawns. You're basically just writing values to the new sprite directly. There actually is one address that you can transfer, which is 15AC, the turning timer. But that technically has nothing to do with Yoshification. You can transfer that from any sprite, because for some reason it doesn't get cleared when a new sprite spawns. Anyway, so 1602. So let me get another Yoshi, and since I spawned the gold tape, I need to reload the room. But basically, I'm gonna Yoshify the gold tape. So I'm gonna go over here and drop Yoshi in the pit, and one frame after he despawns, the gold tape spawns. It doesn't have to be right on the same frame that he despawns, because remember, Yoshification lasts for 2 frames. And actually, 1570 and 1602 both get updated for 3 frames after Yoshi despawns. But anyway, the point being that you can see the gold tape spawns, and on the frame that it spawns, it clears all its tables, as usual. Because it clears all its tables, C2 is set to 0, right? Which means the game thinks that this Yoshified gold tape is not mounted. And because he's not mounted, he should be in his idle animation, which is going to set 1602 to 4. So 1602 gets set to 4. Then you can see that the gold tape also updates C2 on the next frame, and that's because if we look back at the chart, the gold tape uses C2 as the X position of the trigger for the gold tape. So basically, it eventually gets set to some value higher than 2, which would cause 1602 to change to either 0, 1, or 2 for the walking animation, or the running animation frames. But the point being that either way, the goal tape changes its animation, or it changes 1602. So if we look at 1602, the goal tape actually doesn't use this as an animation frame like most sprites do. It actually uses it as a flag that the goal has been crossed. In other words, that you've finished the level. Okay, let me just show you what happens. So basically this happens. The goal tape gets it thinks that it's already been triggered, so it kind of just freezes there and the trigger disappears. And yeah, that's basically the gist of it. So let me look at my notes here to make sure I didn't miss anything important. Basically, what I've shown so far, well, let me mention there is a way to Yoshify the goal tape without doing that, or without the goal tape freezing like that. If 1570 is 0 on both frames of Yoshification, then the goal tape will set C2 to some value higher than 2, which makes the game think that it's running, so it does the running animation frames. And then 1570 gets set, or 1570 gets set to 0, which changes 1602 to 0, and the goal tape clears the flag, which means the goal tape will start moving again. So basically, you can do it without freezing the goal tape, but that's not really as interesting, so I'm not going to show that. But anyway, basically what I've shown so far is that there's 2 addresses you can write to with Yoshification so far. 1570 and 1602. 1570 is used as a timer for when 1602 should update. Also, I've shown that if the new sprite sets C2 to 0, then 1602 will be 4. But if the new sprite sets C2 to 2 or higher, the new sprite will set 1602 to either 2, 1, or 0. Okay. You might be wondering what happens if the new sprite sets C2 to exactly 1, but I'll get to that later. For now, I want to show a couple more values you can write to the new sprite. So, if I go through this pipe, let me talk about a couple of global timers for Yoshi. So the first thing I should mention is that I put a bunch of Yoshis here just to make memory management easier. And now that I have a bunch of Yoshis, I'm going to Yoshify my reserve power-up again. So I'm going to fill some slots to make everything, basically to make it so that the reserve item takes the correct slot. And this time, pay attention to the swallow timer. So if you look up here in the corner, the swallow timer is ticking down. Now, I'm going to Yoshify my reserve flower, but if you watch the swallow timer, basically, I'm going to have the swallow timer run out during Yoshification. So I drop Yoshi in the pit, and then... okay, so the swallow timer updates as long as the real Yoshi byte is non-zero. And when the swallow timer runs out, it writes a couple values. First, it reads 160E, which is the mouth-linked slot for Yoshi. And it uses that to determine which slot to swallow. In other words, which sprite to delete. Then it sets 1602 to 255, which would normally indicate that Yoshi's mouth is empty again. But both these things happen whenever the swallow timer runs out, even if Yoshi is already gone. So in other words, if the swallow timer runs out during Yoshification, it will delete some sprite, and then it will write 255 to 160E. Okay, now if we look back at the chart, 160E, let me find the power-ups here. Oh, it's further down. Okay, so the flower uses 160E as a berry flag, okay? So, if the swallow timer runs out on the frame I Yoshify my reserve flower, watch what happens. So right here, the flower spawns, the key disappears, and the flower turns into a berry. Okay, So basically what happened there, the flower spawns. Then if you look at the tables, you can see that the sprite in slot 160E is 0 right now, because when the flower spawned, it cleared those tables, okay? 160E is 0, which means the mouth linked slot is 0, which means the game thinks that the Yoshi, or air quotes Yoshi, the Yoshified flower, has the sprite in slot 0 in its mouth. So it thinks that the key is in the flower's mouth. Okay? But then the swallow timer runs out on the next frame. And when the swallow timer runs out, it says, okay, the key is in his mouth. The swallow timer ran out, so swallow the key. So the key disappears. Then you'll notice that if you look at 160E now, it gets set to 255. And that's because, or FF in this case, but that's because it's trying to nullify the mouth link slot. But the flower uses 160E as a berry flag, so the flower turns into a berry. Okay, so that's how that works. Kind of complicated, but anyway. So the swallow timer, yeah, it allows you to delete a sprite, and it also allows you to set 160E, which is the berry flag in this case. So it does a couple of cool things. Okay, so it's also worth noting that when I swallow the berry up there, it still gives me a flower, as if it were a flower all along. Okay, now let's talk about the punch timer. So, the punch timer is the timer that ticks down between when you press X or Y on Yoshi to stick out his tongue and when his tongue actually comes out. It's basically, you know, when Mario does the punching animation to punch Yoshi on the back of the head. It's basically the timer before his tongue comes out. Now, just like the swallow timer, when the punch timer runs out, it sets a couple values. Well, actually, more than a couple of values. It also sets 160E to 255, just like the swallow timer. And if you do double tongue glitch, this causes an interesting effect. So if I stick out Yoshi's tongue right when I transform from a power-up, I get something called double tongue glitch, where his tongue gets registered twice. And if I grab something with his tongue the first time, then basically, okay, so the tongue grabs the key, his tongue retracts, now he has the key in his mouth. But then, because of the double tongue glitch, his tongue comes out again. And when his tongue comes out the second time, you can see it sets 160E to 255, which means that his mouth-linked slot is no longer 0. So even though he has the key in his mouth, his mouth is no longer linked to the key. It's basically, the key is just in limbo now. It's not linked to his mouth anymore. So now he has nothing linked to his mouth, but because his mouth is still full, that means I can spit out nothing. And okay, so let me pull up another chart. So, okay, so this table here. So if you look at this table, down where it says null slot, this basically tells you what happens when you spit out something with nothing in his mouth like this. So it writes a few values to the stack. You can see what values it writes up here. But it also disables object interaction for the sprite in slot 3, and the fourth tweaker for slot 1 gets modified, or pretty much cleared. Now the fourth tweaker, if we go to the RAM map on SMW Central, fourth tweaker, okay, fourth tweaker. The most notable thing here is the invincible to Star Cape Fire bouncing bridge. So basically, it makes the sprite in slot 1 vulnerable to fireballs. That's the important thing here. Okay, so if I go back to the game, when I spit out this sprite, you're going to notice that the sprite in slot 3, which is the Yoshi over here, you can see he just falls through the floor because he no longer interacts with objects. Okay. Then also the sprite in slot 1 becomes flammable, which is Yoshi in this case. So now Yoshi is flammable. So this is basically just a really easy way, or a really simple way, to Yoshify a coin. Because when you burn Yoshi, he's going to turn into a coin, and that's going to Yoshify the coin. So if we Yoshify the coin, you can see, so if I throw a fireball at Yoshi, he turns into a coin, and you can see the coin looks kind of glitchy because it's being Yoshified for 2 frames, and then it kind of turns back to normal. So we can burn Yoshi, which is pretty cool, but because we can Yoshify the coin, we can transfer, well, again, it's not really transferring, but we can set some values. So let me get another flammable Yoshi. And okay, so you might be wondering what happens. Yeah, before I talk about what values you can set, let me mention what happens if I burn Yoshi right when I mount him. Okay, so basically I burned Yoshi after I mounted him. So you can see the straddle flag is set, as well as the stored Yoshi flag, which basically just gives you a Yoshi after you go through a pipe. That you can't dismount it because it's not a real Yoshi. But basically, yeah, it causes that glitch. And then now I want to show what happens if you if you Yoshify the coin. Okay, let me just show this because I'm getting mixed up with my words here. But basically, I'm getting yet another flammable Yoshi, and okay. So what happened there? So right here, I'm going to stick out or I'm gonna set the punch timer. Okay. So the punch timer gets set, and then I dismount Yoshi and I throw a fireball at him, and he turns into a coin. The coin is Yoshified. Okay. The punch timer ran out. And because the punch timer ran out, it set 160E to 255. Now, if we look at the chart, once again, 160E, or the moving coin, uses 160E also as a berry flag, so it turns into a berry. Okay, so that explains that. Now, the berry's not flammable or anything like that. You can't really interact with it, but you can still eat it with Yoshi. And if you eat it with Yoshi, it still gives you, well, it gives you a coin, but it actually also gives you points because it's not just a regular coin. It's one of those animated coin or moving coins that like move around and give you points when you collect them. So anyway, okay. So the other thing to mention is that when the punch timer runs out, it also sets, okay, so it sets 160E to 255, but it also sets 1594 to 1. 1594 is used as the mouth routine pointer. It basically tells Yoshi what to do with his mouth or his tongue. When it's set to 1, it means that his tongue should start extending. So it sets 1594 to 1, but it also sets 151C to 0. 151C is the tongue length. So basically it says, okay, start sticking out his tongue and set the tongue length to 0. That's what it does. So first it nullifies the mouth length slot, then it tells him to start extending his tongue, then it sets the tongue length to 0. Okay, so if we do this again, get another flammable Yoshi. And I'm gonna put, let's see, I want to get, yeah, a key in slot 0. Okay, so now I'm gonna do this one more time. But this time I'm gonna have a key right in front of his face. So what's gonna happen here is, okay, right here, I set the punch timer, and then the Yoshi turns into a coin, and the coin is Yoshified. Then that sets 160E to 255, so the coin turns into a berry. Then it also sets 1594 to 1, which basically tells his tongue to start extending. And it also sets 151C to 0. But then on the second frame of Yoshification, so here's the first frame. On the second frame of Yoshification, it sees that 1594 is still 1, which means that his tongue is still supposed to keep extending. So his tongue length was 0, but now it's going to add 3 to his tongue length, which means his tongue's actually going to start coming out. So you see on this frame, the tongue comes out. You can see a tongue overlapping the key. So basically, the Yoshified coin licks the key. Okay? Now, because it licked the key is in slot 0, so the mouth link slot, which is 160E, gets set to 0. So the berry flag gets cleared, and the coin turns back into a coin. Okay, so really subtle, but cool. Okay, so you can do this with other things besides the coin. For example, I'm gonna try to do it with, there's a 1-up block, right? And I wanna do it with the 1-up block here. So that block right there is a 1-up block. Actually, both of these blocks. Now, so I'm gonna try to hit this 1-up block as Yoshi despawns while sticking out his tongue. So if you hit, when you hit a block with an item, if you hit a 1-up block with Mario's head, or pretty much any item from a block, if you hit the block with Mario's head, it processes the sprite to spawn before it processes that Yoshi has despawned. So just like with the reserve item, you can only Yoshify the item for 1 frame. Now, when you hit a block with an item as opposed to Mario's head, it gets processed after Yoshi despawns, so it can take his slot right away, and you can Yoshify the item for 2 frames. So that's what I'm doing here. I'm throwing the key at the block, and then you can see I set the punch timer, and then I'm going to despawn Yoshi right before the key hits the block, and that's going to Yoshify the 1-up. And you can see the 1-up, which you can't see yet, but it's this blue number here. It's going to, so it took Yoshi's slot on the frame that he despawned. So I'm going to Yoshify the 1-up for 2 frames. So now you can see the punch timer is 2, but it's going to keep ticking down, and you can see that the punch timer runs out, which sets 160E to 255. So that's going to turn the 1-up into a berry, as we already established. So the 1-up turns into a berry. Okay, but also the 1-up uses 151C and 1594 as well. It doesn't just use 160E. So 151C gets set to 0, which isn't really that interesting. But 1594 gets set to 1, which is what tells his tongue to start extending. So because 1594 gets set to 1, let's look at the chart again and see what the 1-up uses that for. So 1-up. No. Oh, I don't have it selected. 1-up. Okay. Here it is. So it uses 1594 as, it says unused, but can change the number of lives given by the 1-up. So if it's set to 1, it gives you 2 lives. So in other words, this 1-up, which is now a berry, is set to give me 2 lives instead of 1. Now, that means that if I swallow it with another Yoshi... Oh, sorry, I'm not showing this on screen. Okay. So, if I swallow this one up, or this, berry, this mushroom berry, whatever you want to call it, it gives me a 2-up instead of a 1-up. So, basically, 1594, like I said, there's 3 addresses that get updated when the punch timer runs out. There's 160E, 151C, and 1594. The 1-up happens to use 1594 to determine how many lives to give you. So in this case, we turned it into a 2-up. So I managed to turn a 1-up into a 2-up, but remember that if the tongue comes out and grabs something, it actually sets 1594 to 2, which basically tells the tongue to start retracting. Well, it doesn't start retracting right away because of the tongue cooldown timer, but as long as the tongue cooldown timer is 0, when 1594 is 2, it will start retracting the tongue. But basically, when the tongue latches onto something, it sets 1594 to 2. So in theory, if we Yoshify the 1-up, and then have the tongue come out of the 1-up and grab something, then 1594 will get set to 2, and that will actually cause the 1-up to change into a 3-up instead of a 2-up. So, showing that in action here, let me set up. I gotta make sure everything's in the right slot here. Basically, I just need a Yoshi in a high enough slot that I can do the key grab glitch. I don't want that there. Okay. Alright, so here's what I'm gonna do. This Koopa's gonna be a problem. I need to kill him. Okay. Okay, so I want the fire flower to drop down on the right side of the block. So I'm gonna drop my fire flower, and then I'm gonna drop down, and then I'm gonna throw the key, and then I'm gonna punch Yoshi. That's gonna set the punch timer, and then right before the key despawns, or right before Yoshi, I spawn the 1-up from the block right when Yoshi despawns, so it Yoshifies the 1-up. It sets 1594 to 1, so the tongue comes out. You can't see it very well here, but the tongue is out right now. Okay? The tongue comes out and it latches on to the fire flower. And because the fire flower is in slot 0, just like before, it's going to clear the berry flag. So the berry flag got set, but then it got cleared again. And because the tongue latched onto something, it's going to set 1594 to 2, which is going to turn the 1-up into a 3-up. It's also going to set 151C to 0, which is normally the tongue length, but in this case, the 1-up actually uses that, and let me see what the 1-up uses that as. The 1-up uses 151C as... indicates the power-up is the roulette sprite. Basically, I think what it does is it makes the power-up bounce around. So basically, after all this setup, the 1-up comes out, it starts bouncing around as if it were a roulette power-up. So it did turn into a berry, but it turned back into a mushroom because it latched onto something in slot 0. And you can see when I grab this, it's going to give me a 3-up instead of a 2-up. Okay, so you can make a mushroom act like a, or you can make a 1-up act like a 2-up, you can make a 1-up act like a 3-up, and there's actually more, which I'll get to later, but that's pretty much what I wanted to show for now. So the next thing I want to show is this Koopa, this bouncing Para-Koopa. That's pretty much everything I wanted to show, or I wanted to mention about the punch timer, but it has some more applications. So, for example, the bouncing Koopa. You can see this Koopa is doing high bounces. It's bouncing really high. But, so the bouncing Koopa doesn't use 151C or 1594 for anything, but it does use 160E. So that Koopa does high bounces, but if I drop down in this pit and then stick out Yoshi's tongue, or set the punch timer and then despawn Yoshi and Yoshify the bouncing Koopa, then the punch timer is going to run out, and when it runs out, it sets 160E to 255, and that makes the Koopa do low bounces instead. And the reason for that is that if you look at this chart, I'm probably not going to bring up this chart every time, but just to emphasize, the green bouncing Koopa uses 160E to determine the bounce height. So if it's set, he'll do low bounces. If it's cleared, he'll do high bounces. So in this case, I made him do low bounces instead of high bounces. Okay, so that's just one more application of some of the stuff you can do with the punch timer. So now if you go over here, you'll see that there's a gold tape, right? Now I want to reload the room. And I want to get a Yoshi that's... Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to make Yoshi flammable again. But not only am I going to make him flammable, when you corrupt Yoshi with null slot, it actually also makes him... makes it so that the gold tape is able to replace him if there are no available slots. So when I do this, now the gold tape is able to replace Yoshi. And what that means is we can Yoshify the gold tape very easily. If we just move to the right here, you can see that, well, you can't see it very well, but basically on this frame, you can see the gold tape spawns, and it forces Yoshi to despawn. So, basically, if the gold tape sees that there are no available slots, it will try to replace a slot that already exists. Normally it can't do that with Yoshi, but because Yoshi's been corrupted, he can be replaced. So the gold tape replaces the Yoshi, which Yoshifies the gold tape. But I also set the punch timer here, and when the punch timer runs out, the gold tape spawns, the gold tape is Yoshified, the punch timer runs out, and when the punch timer runs out, you can see the gold tape just disappears completely. That's because the gold tape uses the uses 160E, I think. Oh gosh, I can never find what I'm looking for here. Okay, gold tape. Okay, there we go. So it uses 160E as a flag for the actual tape having been hit. So what that means is basically it thinks that not only have you triggered the end of the level, but you touched the tape, which gives you bonus stars. So when that flag gets set, it essentially causes the gold tape to just despawn, I guess. Not really sure why, but yeah, that's the end result, is that the gold tape just disappears completely. So that's just another way to Yoshify a gold tape, and you can see the punch timer can manipulate the gold tape as well. Okay, so now I want to show... I want to Yoshify a Yoshi egg itself. So these blocks have Yoshi eggs in them, like they're Yoshi blocks, basically. If the punch timer runs out on the... well, okay, if I throw the key at the block, stick out Yoshi's tongue, and then despawn Yoshi and spawn the 1-up, if the punch timer runs out on the second frame of Yoshification, it's going to overwrite 151C with a value of 0. So 151C is normally tongue length. But the Yoshi egg uses 151C to determine what's inside the egg. So, if you set 151C to 0, then the Yoshi egg is going to contain sprite number 0. Sprite number 0 happens to be, also the egg looks glitchy, but it fixes itself when it lands. 1570 is a green Koopa, basically. So it spawns a green Koopa from the egg. And now, what I didn't really mention before is that 151C, yes, we can get a value of 0 in 151C, but we can also add 3 to that value, because on the first frame of Yoshification, it writes 0 to 151C if the punch timer runs out. On the second frame of Yoshification, it adds 3 to that value. So it's going to set it to 0, and then one frame later, it's going to add 3. So if we do this again, but this time I have the punch timer run out one frame earlier, then on this frame, the punch timer gets set to, the punch timer runs out, which sets 151C to 0. Then one frame later, it adds 3. So if you look at 151C, you can see it gets set to 3. And that's going to cause the egg to contain sprite number 3, which is a yellow Koopa. Okay. So it's worth noting that when a sprite spawns from a block, it doesn't go through the same initialization frame than when a sprite spawns naturally, which means that it actually sets all its values on the first frame it spawns instead of the second. Now, on the second frame of Yoshification, when it adds 3 to 151C, it doesn't set the value to 3. It adds 3 to whatever the value currently is. But because the value gets set one frame earlier than when a sprite spawns naturally, it means that it gets overwritten by 0 before it adds 3. So you never... If you could actually add 3 to the value of what's inside the egg, like if you could make a 1-up spawn from the egg but then add 3 to that value, then you'd be able to get a value of... You could add 3 to 7, 8, which is the value of the 1-up. And if you add 3 to 7, 8, you would get 7B, which is the value of the goal tape. So in other words, if you could do that, then you could spawn a goal tape from a Yoshi egg. But since the Yoshi egg doesn't spawn naturally, 7, 8 gets overwritten by 0 before it adds 3. Anyway, just a little side note. So, now let's look at P-switches. P-switches use 151C to determine which type of switch it is. 0 means blue, and 1 means silver. Depending on which frame you stick out the tongue, you can either write 0 or add 3 to the current value. So if the punch timer runs out on the second frame, the Yoshified silver P-switch, so right here you can see the silver P-switch spawns and takes Yoshi's slot. Then the punch timer runs out, and when the punch timer runs out, it sets 151C to 0, and basically that's going to turn the silver P-switch into a blue one. It still looks silver, but you can see when I press it, it acts like a blue P-switch. Okay. Now, if the punch timer runs out on the second frame, or sorry, on the first frame, then it'll set the value to 0, but then 1 frame later, the silver P-switch will set the value to 1. So I'm going to do it again, but this time, so the silver P-switch spawns, the punch timer runs out, that sets 151C to 0. But then on the next frame, the silver P-switch, so if you look at the tables here, the silver P-switch sets 151C to 1 on the second frame it spawns, and then the game adds 3 to that value because it's trying to extend his tongue, so it adds 3, and now you can see 1513 is 1 plus 3, which is 4. So basically it gets a value of 4. So what happens when the P-switch has a value of 4 instead of 1 or 0? Well, basically when you press it, it appears that nothing happens. Well, actually, if we look at P-switch timer, switch timer. Okay, if we look at this on the RAM up on SMW Central, basically 14AD is the blue P-switch's timer, and 14AE is the silver P-switch's timer, and that value uses or it indexes these bytes to determine where to set the timer. So if it's 0, it will write a value of B0 to this byte, this one here, and if it's 1, it will write a value of B0 to this byte. So if it's 4, it's going to write a value of B0 to I guess this byte, or maybe it's B1, but the point is it writes a value of B0 to this. Now, you'll notice that Bowser uses this as a timer. Unfortunately, we can't do this glitch in Bowser's room, and you know, there's no P-switches there or anything like that, so it's not really, it doesn't really do anything noticeable, but it does write a value of B0 to this byte, or one of these 2 bytes. And if we could write a value of 2 then we would actually get a P-switch that toggles the on-off switch value, which would be pretty cool. But there's no way to get a value of 2. We can either get a value of 0 or add 3 to the current value. So there's no way to do that. But anyway, it does write a value of B0 to this, but it doesn't actually make the timer tick down. So normally the timer would get set to B0 and then it would decrement every frame or every other frame or whatever, every 4th frame, I guess. But in this case, the timer wouldn't tick down at all. And because the timer doesn't tick down at all, there's nothing to stop the music. So you'll notice that the music's just gonna keep going here. It never stops. So to fix that, I'm just gonna press the blue switch, because I don't want the music to be stuck like that forever. Okay, so when you press the blue switch, then it sets a new timer, which fixes the music. But anyway. Okay, so there's a Dino Torch over there. So I'm going to try Yoshifying the Dino Torch. Now, the Dino Torch uses 151C as a, it uses it to, let me just look at the chart. I don't remember exactly. Dino Torch. So let's look at 151C. Length of fire. 0 means max, 4 means none. Kind of weird how it works, but anyway. That basically means that if I Yoshify this, if I punch Yoshi and then Yoshify this Dino Torch, it's gonna set the value to 0, which is gonna make the Dino Torch think that it's supposed to be, its length of the fire is supposed to be extended all the way. Unfortunately, it's purely graphical, so it doesn't actually hurt you, but it's kind of neat. Now, if I have the punch timer run out 1 frame earlier, then on the 2nd frame of Yoshification, it's going to add 3. So basically, it sets the fire length to 0. Then on the next frame, the Dino Torch sets the value to 4, indicating that his fire is indicating that he's not breathing fire. And when it sets the value to 4, then it adds 3 to that value because of the Yoshification. So it adds 3 to 4, which gives you 7. And this is what happens. Okay, basically Mario turns invisible, sort of, and then he kind of flickers back into existence. And you'll also notice if you look at the top of the screen, I'm getting a lot of lag frames. Like right here, the game is lagging like crazy. I'm not sure exactly what's going on, but I think what's happening is basically it's trying to render the fire using 7 as some kind of like index into OAM or something. But anyway, it's not very useful, but it's kind of cool. Basically, the value is not supposed to be 7. It's only supposed to be either 4, 3, 2, 1, or 0, I guess. So when it's higher than that, weird stuff happens. But okay, another interesting one to talk about is the angel blocks, the flying question blocks. So if we go over to the right here, you can see these 4 flying question blocks. Now, they have different contents. The first one has a coin. The second one has a flower. The third one has a feather. And the 4th one has a 1-up. Okay? So coin, flower, feather, 1-up. Now, if we look at the chart again, the angel blocks use 151C as a flying... Oh, whoops. No. Flying... question... No. I don't know what they're called here. Winged... maybe? Okay, whatever, I'll just find it. So... here it is. Flying question block. So, 151C... Okay, so the question blocks, the flying question blocks use 151C to determine what's inside them. So I already mentioned, well, basically they can have a coin, a fire flower, a feather, or a 1-up. But that's not the whole story. Basically, 151C is used as an index into a table to get another value, which is then used as some kind of pointer to spawn the sprite from them. So to go into a little more detail, a value of 0 gives a coin, a value of 1 gives a flower, a value of 2 gives a feather, 3 gives a 1-up, 4 gives a coin, 5 5 gives a mushroom, 6 gives a mushroom, and 7 gives a 1-up. Basically, it uses the first 4 values if you're big, and the next 4 if you're small. In other words, it adds 4 to the value if you're small. So if you write a value of 0 during Yoshification, the block will default to coin, and then if you add 3, it would be 0 plus 3, which is 3, which gives a 1-up. Okay, so let me just show that real quick. So let me show this on screen. So basically, I'm going to Yoshify the first angel block here, and I'm going to set the punch timer. So the punch timer runs out. That's going to set 151C to 0. Then it adds 3, so now 151C is 3, so the question block is going to contain a 1-up. And if I shrink, it's still going to contain a 1-up. Because both the value and 4 plus the value are going to give you the same contents. So anyway, now let me do it with the next block. So the next block is supposed to contain a flower, but if I Yoshify it and stick out his tongue, and then I shrink, it's going to be... So, okay. It gives me... Well, let me just look at my notes real quick so I don't get tripped up on my words. So, for the flower block, adding 3 gives you a value of 4, which corresponds to a coin. And shrinking adds another 4, which gives a value of 8. But the table only has 8 bytes, and since it starts counting at 0, a value of 8 actually goes past the table and reads the next byte in memory as some kind of pointer. This next value in memory happens to be 60. So what happens when I hit the block while I'm small? Well, I don't know the logic exactly, but the end result in this case is that it spawns a weird sprite in a weird state. In this case, it's a Lakitu, but it's in state like 164. Like if you look over here, 164. So it's in this weird state. It makes it invisible and somewhat intangible, but I can still thwack it with my cape. So if I wait for these blocks to move and then... Okay, so you can see the Lakitu falls down, and also... I don't know what this is. I guess this is like the hitbox of the 1-up that the Lakitu holds or something. I don't know. Anyways, weird stuff happens, but basically it's a Lakitu. It looks glitchy because it's in the wrong tile set, but yeah. So basically the angel block spawned a Lakitu, and you can actually get it to spawn other things, I think. I don't know exactly in detail how this works, but anyway. So what about the feather block? So this time it's going to add 3 to 2, if I do the glitch again, which is going to give a value of 5. Now 5 corresponds to a mushroom, so if I don't shrink and I just hit this block, it's going to give a mushroom. So normally the way the block works is if you're small it gives a mushroom, and if you're big it gives a feather, but because I screwed up the values, it actually, even though I'm big, it still gives me a mushroom. Okay, what about shrinking? Well, I'll come back to that. Now, the 1-up block is the last one, and the 1-up block sets a value of 3, and if we add 3 to that, it's going to give us 6, and that corresponds to a mushroom, and if I shrink, it's going to add another 4, which gives a value of 10. Okay? 10 is another glitched value, so this time it reads a value of 2D, which ends up spawning a green Koopa. And again, it's in a weird state, but I can still stun it with a cape. And sure enough, I get a shell. Okay, so lastly, let's talk about doing it with the feather block, and then shrinking. So doing it with the feather block adds 3 to 2, giving 5. But this time I'll also shrink, which adds another 4. Okay, so you can see the feather block is the one that's kind of lower than the rest. So now when I hit this block, the game crashes. Okay, so yeah, so weird stuff can happen when you mess with the angel blocks. Again, I don't know exactly the logic of like what causes that to happen, but let's go back. Okay, so on the topic of game crashes, actually, you know what? I should mention, almost possible to crash the game with the feather block in the original Super Mario World, but the problem is the only level that has a winged feather block is Donut Plains 2, and the camera doesn't scroll downward in that level, so you can't despawn Yoshi right before sticking out his tongue, and not to mention you'd have to somehow clip through the floor and then get back up. And also I need to fix the capture here because something happened. Okay. So on the topic of game crashes, there's actually one that you can do in the original game, and one that you can do with Yoshification. So I've mentioned that you can use the punch timer to write to 1594, which Yoshi uses as his mouth routine pointer. But not only can you write there, the game also reads that address during Yoshification to make his tongue do things. So if you Yoshify a sprite that uses that address, you can make Yoshi do things with his tongue or with his mouth. But normally the only valid values are from 0 to 3, and these values are used as pointers to different routines. So what if the new sprite sets a value higher than 3? Well, basically it would end up reading garbage code. So the Koopa shells use this address as their linked slot, basically the slot of the Koopa that is hopping into them. So if we make a Koopa hop into a shell while Yoshifying the shell, then as long as the Koopa is in slot 4 or higher, it should cause something glitchy to happen. So it turns out you can make a Koopa constantly hop next to a shell if he's on his belly, so that's why I kicked that Koopa out of the shell to the left there. And now when I spawn this red shell again, right when Yoshi despawns, the red shell spawns, and then the Koopa in slot 6, you can see, is right next to the shell, so he's going to try to jump into the shell, and when that happens, it's going to set the shell's linked slot to 6, which is going to set the mouth routine pointer to 6, and then the game is going to read that and try to do something with Yoshi, and boom, game crash. Okay, so it also shrunk my emulator window for some reason. BizHawk is a good emulator sometimes. Okay, anyway, let me okay, let me am I gonna have to fix the capture again? Oh god. Alright. Okay, so alright, so let's just go to the next room. Let's look at the scale platforms. So the scale platforms, in other words, these platforms over here, we can manipulate 1570 and 1602 without using Yoshi's tongue, and we can manipulate 151C, 1594, and 160E using Yoshi's tongue. The scale platform doesn't use 1570 for anything, so let's look at 1602. It uses this byte as the high byte of the X position of the second platform. Since that platform sets C2 to 2 or higher, we can only get a value of 0, 1, or 2 into 1602. And sure enough, in this case, I get a value of 1, which moves the second platform to screen 1. Pretty cool. Now, let's see what we can do with the punch timer. The scale platforms don't use 1594 or 160E, but they do use 151C. This time, it's used as the high byte of the Y position of the second platform. So we can either set it to 0 or add 3 to it. So this time I'm going to add 3 to the value. So the punch timer runs out, it adds 3, and that's going to move the second platform's Y position down 3 screens. So now the second platform is way below the level. And you can see when I trigger this, it starts sinking because the other platform is way below it, so it's trying to level itself with the other platform. Okay. So that's pretty much all I wanted to show with the scale platforms. Now, here I'm going to mess with 151C some more with the punch timer. So the fish, the like goldfish, the cheeps, whatever, the ones that swim around like this, the ones that swim back and forth, they use 151C as a flag for whether to move horizontally or vertically. So I think a value of 0 means horizontal, and a value of any other value means vertical. So even though if you look back here, the first fish is moving vertically, you can see, right? The one on the left is moving vertically. But now if I Yoshify him and set 151C to 0, he starts moving horizontally instead. So I can manipulate his flag there. And I can do the same thing with the other fish. If I set his flag to 3 by adding 3 to the value, then the other fish that was moving horizontally before, now he's moving vertically. Okay. Now, the dolphin normally jumps back and forth, but if I look at the chart, here we go, back to the chart again. Dolphin, I can't spell dolphin. What is this? Dolphin long, okay. So he uses 151C as a flag to stop the dolphin from turning around. Okay, so if we set 151C to, if we add 3 to it, then it's going to set that flag. So I'll just do that real quick, so you can see what happens. And there we go. We get a dolphin that doesn't move around at all. Okay, so pretty silly stuff. Now, okay, now for the aspect of the glitch that I haven't gone into yet, which is probably the most important aspect. What if the sprite sets C2 to 1? Remember that Yoshi uses C2 as a mounted flag, and it normally makes him warp underneath Mario. Well, during Yoshification, the same thing happens with the Yoshified sprite. So first we need a sprite that sets C2 to 1. Note that every sprite is going to set C2 to 0 on its initial frame, so it will only ever get set to 1 on the second frame. Now, looking at the chart again, power-ups use... where are the power-ups? I think I passed them. Yeah, power-ups use they use C2 as flag to indicate the sprite is on the ground and shouldn't move, cleared when it starts moving. So basically, it's a stationary flag. Okay? So, so power-ups, as long as they're stationary, will set C2 to 1. And that will make them actually warp underneath Mario during Yoshification. So here you can see there's a red mushroom right there. And if I Yoshify it, then on this frame, well, on this frame it spawns, okay? And it takes Yoshi's slot. Then on the second frame of Yoshification, it's going to set C2 to 1. So if you look at the chart over here, you can see C2 gets set to 1, which means the mounted flag is set. So the mushroom is going to warp underneath Mario. And it basically teleports to him. And not only that, but if you look closely in the at these flags in the upper left, the stored Yoshi flag also got set. Like the mounted flag got set, but the stored Yoshi flag also got set. Why is the mounted flag got set? I don't need that anymore. The stored Yoshi flag got set, and the Yoshi color got set to 8. Okay. So, the stored Yoshi flag is what causes Yoshi to follow you between rooms. If it's set, the game will create a new Yoshi under you in the next room, and it uses the Yoshi color byte to determine what color to give. Since the mushroom uses the red palette, it sets the Yoshi color to 8, which is red. And since the stored Yoshi flag didn't get cleared, if we go in this pipe, if we go in this pipe, it should create a red Yoshi on the other side. Alright, so that's pretty cool. You can probably guess what's going to happen if we do the exact same thing with the 1-up mushroom. Okay, so if I get in the right spot here, I should be able to Yoshify the mushroom. There we go. Okay, now again, it set the stored Yoshi flag to 1, but it also set the Yoshi color to A. Now A corresponds to green. Okay, so you get a green Yoshi, not that exciting. Now let's do the same thing, but with the feather here. I actually need to reload the room because the feather doesn't despawn off screen when it's stationary for some reason. So if we do it with the feather, you might be able to guess what happens. So we made the feather teleport, then when we go through the pipe, we get a Yoshi color of 4, which is yellow. Alright, now the fire flower, you might be wondering, the fire flower uses the same palette as the mushroom, so, as the 1-up, so it would just give you a green Yoshi. But the Starman over there, the Starman's actually interesting, because it doesn't give you yellow like you might expect. It actually sets the Yoshi color to 0. But it still sets the stored Yoshi flag. So when I go through the pipe, it's still going to give me a Yoshi, but the Yoshi color is going to be 0, which is gold. We get a gold Yoshi. Alright, and the gold Yoshi you can see acts like a blue one, so I can fly around with a shell. So that's just one of many glitched colors you can get. Alright, now you can store a Yoshi with more than just power-ups though. The bullet bill uses C2 to determine which direction it's facing. If it's facing left, it will set C2 to 1. So if I Yoshify the bullet bill when it shoots left, whoops, well, there's some glitchy graphics going on, but just ignore that. So if I Yoshify the bullet bill when it's facing left, in other words, when I'm on the left side of the cannon, right here, the bullet bill is going to teleport to me. And because there's Yoshis loaded, it stores the straddle flag. But anyway, now when I go through the pipe, you can see I have a Yoshi color of 2, which corresponds to a silver Yoshi. So you can get a gold Yoshi, you can get a silver Yoshi. The silver one acts like a yellow, so it causes earthquakes. That's some fun stuff. All right. Now another sprite you can do this with is the bubbles. So that's why I have a bubble here. Bubbles use C2 to determine what sprite is inside of them. The bomb sets the value to 1. So if I Yoshify the bomb and it warps to me, then when I go through the pipe, you can see the Yoshi color is 1. So a Yoshi color of 1 gives you this thing. Basically, it's a like chuck hammer Yoshi thing. It has glitchy graphics. I guess it's trying to render the Yoshi, but it's pulling tiles from the wrong page or something. And you can't really tell what color it is because it always looks this sort of like pinkish color. But if you look at the outline around it, you can kind of see like a tint of a color. But anyway, it acts like a blue one. Okay. Now, you can also store Yoshi with line-guided platforms. Now, in order to set C2 to 1, the platform has to actually be touching a line 1 frame after it spawns. So these lines here, if you look over here, there's a few platforms on lines. As long as they spawn on a line, like these ones, then they will set C2 to 1. The platforms use C2 as like a flag that they're touching a line, basically. So, as long as they spawn on a line, I'll be able to store Yoshi with them. And you'll also notice that the platforms actually use 1602 as a flag for being a checkerboard platform rather than just a brown platform. Now, this doesn't look like a checkerboard platform because it's in the wrong tile set, but it is. So, because Yoshification modifies 1602, it also turns it into a checkerboard platform, which makes it look glitchy in this case. Anyway, you'll see that also gave me a Yoshi color of 1. So when I go through the pipe, it's going to give me the same Yoshi that I got before. So Yoshi storage is pretty cool, but there's more you can do with sprites that set C2 to 1. For example, on the frame you mount during Yoshification, you can actually start punching Yoshi by pressing Y or X. So I'll go ahead and show that real quick. So you see I pressed Y on the frame that I Yoshified the 1-up, or on the frame that it teleported to me. So basically I punched the 1-up like a Yoshi. Unfortunately, the Yoshification ends before the punch timer runs out, or even before the punch timer gets set. So nothing really interesting happens. But instead of talking about the punch timer, let's talk about the swallow timer. So if the swallow timer is set when you mount a Yoshified sprite like the 1-up, you can actually spit out what's in your mouth on the frame you mount it. But the game uses 160E to determine the slot number of what's in Yoshi's mouth. So if the sprite sets 160E to some value, you end up spitting out the sprite in that slot instead. Most sprites set 160E to 0, or sometimes 1. A lot of them use it as a flag of some kind. So you can spit out whatever is in slot 0, for example. If nothing is in slot 0, it will spit out whatever was last in slot 0. In this case, Yoshi was the last thing in slot 0. So, the 1-up spawns, it teleports to me, I spit out what's in my mouth, but because 160E is 0, it spits out what was last in slot 0, which is a Yoshi. Also, the 1-up turns into a berry because the swallow timer, or when you spit something out, it sets 160E to 255. But anyway, so now we have a Yoshi that's in its stun state. So when you spit out something from Yoshi's mouth, it comes out in its stun state. Yoshi's never supposed to be in his stun state, so he looks really weird. Basically, he looks like some like burnt up version of Mario, but he mimics whatever animation Mario's doing. But that's what a stunned Yoshi looks like. And also, it's worth mentioning, remember 1594, the mouth routine pointer? Well, remember that the 1-up uses 1594 to determine how many lives to give you. Now, remember that, or I should mention that when you spit something from Yoshi's mouth, it sets 1594 to 3. And that means that we can set a value of 3 on the 1-up for 1594, which is going to turn it into a 5-up. So now if I swallow this berry, it's going to give me a 5-up. Well, it's really more like upside down 5, upside down PU or something, but it's supposed to say 5-up, just the tiles are flipped backwards and upside down. But anyway, it does give you 5 lives. Like you'll notice I get 5 lives from it. So basically we can turn a 1-up into a 2-up, a 3-up, or a 5-up. Now, I should also mention that when you spit out whatever was last in slot 0, if there was nothing in slot 0 since you started the level, then it will spit out the default sprite, which is a naked green Koopa, and that default sprite will have the default palette, which is gold. So it will spit out a gold Koopa. So you can actually get a gold Koopa to come out. Now it comes out in its stun state, so it's a little bit glitchy, but you can get a gold Koopa, but I can't show that here because I already loaded something in slot 0. You'd have to do the glitch before anything loads in slot 0. But anyway, it's worth noting the 5-up thing. You can almost do that in the original Super Mario World. You can get the 2-up and the 3-up in the original game, but the problem with the 5-up is that it turns into a berry, and you need one Yoshi to Yoshify the 1-up and another Yoshi to eat the berry. But there's no stationary 1-ups in the same room as a Yoshi block in the original game, so there's no way to eat the berry if you do the glitch. So you can turn a 1-up into a 5-up in the original game, but you can't actually eat the berry to get the 5-up. Anyway, going back to 160E. So if the new sprite sets that address to a value between 0 and 11, it just spits out the sprite that was last in that slot. But what if it sets the value to something higher than that? Well, the only sprites that do are the line-guided sprites. So, namely, the platforms over here to the right. They use 160E to determine which line tile they're writing. So there's 32 different line tiles. I don't have all of them on display. Like over here, there's a whole bunch of line tiles grouped together. I don't show all of them here, but I show a few of them. But basically, there's 32 line tiles, so you can get a value anywhere from 0 to 1F, depending on what line they spawn on. In this level, I only have 3 different ones set up, right? The first one is on a horizontal line tile, which corresponds to a value of 1D. So let me get the platform to spawn right when Yoshi despawns with something in his mouth. So I need to despawn that. Okay. So right here, I'm going to... Alright, so right here, I'm going to spawn the thing, and then I'm going to spit out what's in Yoshi's mouth. Now, instead of spitting out whatever was last in slot 0, or last in slot 1, it's going to try to spit out whatever was last in slot 1D. But sprites normally can't spawn in slot 1D, just like they can't spawn in slot 255, like before. So, basically, when I spit it out, some weird stuff happens. Okay, so, let me... Here, I'll just... So pay attention to... Well, let me bring up... The first thing I should mention is that when the platform teleports, the value in 160E, so it's in slot 2, you can see that when it teleports, slot 2 gets set to 0, and then 1 frame later, it gets set to 1D, okay? Then on the next frame, I spit out what is in his mouth, so it gets set to FF. But you'll notice that it doesn't change according to the line that it's currently touching. So after it teleports, now it's touching a different line tile, right? It's touching that vertical line, but it doesn't actually update 160E because it only updates... It only updates the value when it rides to the end of the line tile that it's on. So if it teleports away, it doesn't update the value, and it still thinks it's on the line. And if I trigger the platform, it still moves horizontally for one tile. Like you can see right here when I land on it, it moves to the right, and then it latches onto the next line. And then so anyway, 160E doesn't get updated basically, but so if I spit out the item on the second frame, right, I guess I already spit it out. Yeah, so right, I need to move my game window so I can actually see this. So if I spit it out on this frame, okay, so what did that do? Let me bring up the chart from before, not this chart, this chart. Okay, so I already showed you what happens if you have a null slot in Yoshi's mouth. It makes Yoshi flammable, among other things, or it makes the sprite in slot 0 flammable. But now we can get a value anywhere from C to 1F, which is going to cause a whole bunch of weird stuff to happen. So in this case, I spit it out on 1D, okay? So it's going to do something to the sprite in slot 5. It's going to clear C2 for slot 5. It's going to modify the player's position, actually, Y position. But that's sort of misleading because that byte is controlled by another byte, which corrects it. So you don't actually get to see any effect from that. Like, you don't actually teleport. And the rest of the stuff it did mostly has to do with slot 5. Like, if you look over to the right here, sprite X position high byte for slot 5, sprite Y subspeed for slot 5, sprite X subspeed for slot 5, slot 5, blah, blah, blah. So it does a whole bunch of stuff to slot 5. It also does something to slot 7, which is right here. It sets the Y position low byte for slot 7. So if you look on screen here, you can actually see some of this stuff happening right on this. So if you look carefully, look to the right over here. Oh wait, you can't see it. if you look to the right over here, right before I spit it out on this frame, all of a sudden the sprite in slot 5 teleports way over here because its X position high byte is getting written to, and the sprite in slot 7, this Yoshi, teleports upward because its Y position got modified. So basically it did some weird stuff. So that's pretty cool. But what if you do it with a different line tile instead of 1D? So if we I don't think it does anything else of interest. Yeah, let me just go through the pipe and reset everything. Okay, so oh, it's also worth noting that in the original game, the only values you can get are 1D, which is the one I just showed. You can get that in Donut Plains 3, for example, and you can also get 1C in like Cheesebridge area, for example. 1D and 1C are both horizontal line tiles, but they're different types, and you can't change the line a platform is connected to by making it teleport, as I mentioned. So you can't get any other values since platforms and ropes only ever spawn on horizontal line tiles in the original game. So I'll mention what 1C does in a second. I'm not going to explain what every tile would do because you can look at the chart for that, but I'll show what tile 18 does, or I shouldn't say 18, but tile 1-8, because it's kind of interesting. So looking at the chart, so this sprite is going to spawn on this frame. It spawns and it sets 160E to 1-8, okay? So it sets it to 1-8, and then I spit out the sprite in slot 1-8 on the next frame, right? And that's going to set 160E to FF. But anyway, on if we look at the chart again, so 1-8. It does a few things, but probably the most notable thing is right here, sprite data pointer lowest byte. So the sprite data pointer is like a 3-byte address that is used as a pointer to where in the memory the spawn points and the like spawn types or sprite types for each spawn point in the level. So in this case, if we spit it out while standing, or in this case in the air, it's going to write a value of 30. So it writes a value of 30 to this address, which is going to mess up the pointer for the spawn points and everything in this level. So now, if I go to the left here, you'll notice that nothing's going to spawn. Well, this feather was already loaded, but none of the power-ups are spawning, the Yoshi's not spawning, nothing's spawning. In fact, sometimes you can get really weird stuff to happen. Oh wait, you can't actually see this. Whoops. Okay. So let me show that again because it wasn't on screen. So you'll notice that when I go to the left here after spitting it out, basically nothing spawns. The feather's still there, but that's because it was already loaded. So nothing's spawning because it's reading from the wrong... It's basically trying to read data from a different level or from a non-existent level. So it's not finding any spawn points or anything. So sometimes you can get weird stuff to happen though. I guess depending on what room you're in, you can sometimes get a new sprite to spawn. New sprites to spawn in weird locations. For example, I've had it spawn a ton of naked green Koopas at 0-0. I've also had a moving hole spawn in the middle of a level. I've had magic Koopa magic spawn. In theory, you could get a lot of weird stuff to happen with this. And again, you can't do this in the original SMW, sadly. But anyway. Okay, now let me go through the pipe real quick. Things are about to get trippy. Just ignore that. I'm not sure if that's related to something that I just corrupted with the game, or if that's something else. But anyway, that fixed it, so just ignore that. Okay, so let's do it again, but this time let me show what happens with 1C. So I showed 1D, I showed 1-8, now let's show 1C. So if we look at the chart real quick, 1C looks pretty similar to 1D. You can see it does a lot of the same stuff as 1D, except instead of slot 5, you can see it changes stuff for slot 4, which is kind of neat. But other than that, it's pretty similar to 1D. But if you look closely, you'll notice that 1C actually modifies the game mode. So that's interesting. And again, if you look at the chart, not only does it modify the game mode, but the values you can write are basically anywhere near Yoshi's X position. So it depends on where Yoshi is, but you can get a wide range of values is the point, depending on where you are. So you can get a wide range of values for the game mode, which is kind of interesting. Now, let me demonstrate this. There you go. Okay, so I spawned the platform that was on line 1C, and that caused the... And then I Yoshified the platform, and I spit out the sprite, which set the game mode to whatever value it set it to, which just so happens to be the end screen. So I set the game mode to... Well, in this case, I skipped over the credits, but in theory, you could also warp to the enemy list or like somewhere else in the credits. So yeah, yes. So you can basically credits warp with this, and I didn't use any ACE to do that, any arbitrary code execution. And I did mention that this is possible in the original SMW, and it is. The problem is that you can only do this in like Cheesebridge area or Way Cool, and there might be one more level I'm forgetting, but the problem with these levels is that they don't have any items that you can hold in Yoshi's mouth, so you can't set the swallow timer. So in order to do this credits warp, you'd have to bring an item into the level somehow. The simplest way to do that would be to eat a chuck that gives you a key in your reserve box. And you don't have to do ACE or open bus or anything like that, but you do have to eat a chuck. I forget exactly which chuck power-up combination gives you a key, but yeah. Anyway, that's pretty much everything I wanted to show involving Yoshification. There's obviously a bunch more things that you can do with it that I didn't show, but anyway, to summarize this glitch, the first thing you need to know is how the new sprite uses C2. If the new sprite sets C2 to 0, then you can get a value between 0 and 3, in 1570 and a value of 4 in 1602. If the new sprite sets C2 to 2 or higher, you can get a value between 0 and 2 in 1570 and a value between 0 and 2 in 1602. If the punch timer runs out during Yoshification, you can set 160E to 255, 1594 to 1, and 151C to 0 on the first frame of Yoshification, and add 3 to its value on the next frame. And you can also set 1594 to 2 if the tongue grabs something. If the new sprite sets C2 to 1, you can store Yoshi with the color of the sprite you Yoshified. One more thing to mention is that you can actually set 1558 to 15, or I didn't show that because there's not really anything you can do with it, but I'll go ahead and add that to the well, can I do this? I'll go ahead and add that. So 1558. Okay, so if you look on screen, you can see the third column is now 1558. So you can actually set 1558 on the new sprite if it spawns in. Let me just see if I can do it real quick. So if you spit something out while Yoshifying a sprite that spawns in 1, 2, 3, let's just see if this works. Okay, so on this frame, when I spit this out, watch 1558 on the chart for slot 9. So right here, it gets set to F, which is basically 15. That's basically the tongue cooldown timer. So you can actually set that value on the new sprite, and it will actually tick down like a timer. Now, I didn't mention it because it's not really that useful. If we look at the charts here, 1558. Some sprites use it as something interesting, but the problem is you can only do this with sprites that set C2 to 1, like power-ups, for example, and I don't think power-ups really use it for anything interesting. Unused timer to disable interaction with the sides of blocks. Huh. Okay. So, yeah, in theory, you could make power-ups not interact with the sides of blocks briefly, but they'd have to be stationary power-ups anyway, so I don't think that would really... Yeah, it's not really useful, is the point. So that's why I didn't show it. But in theory, you could do that. Now let me go ahead and get rid of 1558. All right. Now, all right, for a finale. Actually, is there anything else I wanted to mention? So yeah, you can set 1558 to 15. You can also do stun glitch by spitting out something on the frame you mount the new sprite. And finally, if the new sprite is a line-guided platform, you can do overslot corruption by spitting something out. So if you want to mess with this glitch, go ahead. You might find something new. I'll link the charts and the relevant memory addresses and stuff. And for a finale, let me go into the pipe at the end of the level here. Alright, so I'm going to go through this pipe, and I'm going to make a few save states, I guess. Alright, now what I'm going to do here is... Why am I writing a Yoshi? Oh, stored Yoshi flag, of course. Okay. Well, I'm going to... Okay. I'm going to set the real Yoshi byte. I'm going to freeze it, and I'm going to set it to 10. So this is what Yoshification would look like if it lasted for more than 2 frames. Alright, here we go. Is that guy going to keep following me? I want him to turn around. Is he going to despawn? Good. Okay, let me get rid of this guy. So you can see weird stuff happens. Oh! Okay, I Yoshified the Paragoomba. Okay, so he starts teleporting sometimes. Oh, I Yoshified the mushroom, I guess. Oh look, a message box. Let's read it. Okay, yeah, the message box uses C2 as like a flag that you're hitting the message box. So when you hit the message box, it thinks that you're writing it like a Yoshi, so you kind of get pushed to the side like that. Let's see. Oh, the mole uses C2 as like a flag that it's... I'm not even sure what it does. Okay. The Pokey... I don't even think the Pokey does anything when it's Yoshified. It doesn't even look glitchy. Oh, that's the Pokey. Okay. Oh, Chuck. Oh, God. Okay. Chuck does some weird stuff, because basically, the Chuck uses a lot of the different miscellaneous tables for a lot of its AI. It's kind of a complicated sprite. So, Yoshi is also kind of a complicated sprite, and when you have 2 complicated sprites both battling for the same memory addresses, weird stuff happens. Let's just put it that way. In fact, sometimes you can get him to stick out his tongue. Hold on. Yeah, like, I'm not pressing Y to stick out the tongue. He's just doing that. I'm trying not to stomp on him. Like, sometimes his tongue just comes out. I don't know. He does weird stuff. Let's see. Oh, Sumo Brother, I think, does something weird. Oh god, he looks... I'm not sure what's happening. Oh god, I can bounce on him. Yeah. What about this guy? I want to get rid of the... Okay, I gotta rewind to get rid of this guy, because he's not gonna leave me alone. Okay. Oh, the lightning's Yoshified. Okay. Oh, Piranha Plant. I guess he teleports to you when he's jumping. Okay. What else? Koopa. Oh, yeah, I already showed that the Koopas can, Hold on, let me clear the straddle flag real quick. Okay. I already mentioned that the Koopas can crash the game when they enter a Yoshified shell. Oh, that's right. Okay, I need to do this, and then I need to clear the straddle flag again. It's so much easier to do this stuff when you have cheats. Okay, now if this Koopa enters the shell, it should crash the game. Yes. As expected. Alright, now, don't... Okay, now stop. Rewind. Okay, whatever. What else? Oh, the Hammer Brother. The Hammer Brother's not crashing the game. I wonder if that's because I have a Yoshi in slot 8 over there. Guess I could, let's just bring this mushroom with me. I'm trying to make the game crash because, the Hammer Brother... Oh god. No, 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 no. The Hammer Brother uses... Oh god. The Hammer Brother uses, Okay, I'm just gonna clear this. No, it's not gonna let me. Alright, set the real Yoshi bite to slot 9. Or slot 10, whatever. And then clear the straddle flag. This is a pain, even with cheats. And then set this to 10 again. Okay. What? No. What is this? What am I writing right now? This glitch is weird. Oh, there we go. I got the game to crash. Okay, so basically the Hammer Brother platform uses C2. No, sorry, not C2. The Hammer Brother platform uses 1594 as its linked slot to indicate what slot the Hammer Brother that's writing it is in. So in this case, I think the Hammer Brother that's writing it is in slot 6, I guess. So when the Hammer Brother platform spawns, it sets its linked slot to 6 since the Hammer Brother is in slot 6, and the game reads that as the mouth routine pointer, which, you know, just like before with the shell, causes it to crash the game. Alright, now let's try this again. For some reason it doesn't happen when he's in slot 7. Well, that's kind of interesting. I wonder what's going on behind the scenes there. Anyway, and then lastly, well, I need to... Oh gosh, okay, don't hit that. Let me... I need to get rid of this platform. Or at least spawn it in a different slot. Come on, ugh. Okay. So now let's get the gold tape in slot. Okay, so now we Yoshified the gold tape. So it's moving slowly because because C2 is higher than 2, so it's using the running animation frames. So 1602 is cycling between 0, 1, and 2, 0, 1, and 2, 0, 1, and 2, as you can see. And the gold tape uses that as a flag that the the tape has been triggered, so it freezes every time it's non-zero. So it goes 1, 2, the gold tape freezes, and then it goes back to 0 and it starts moving again, and then it goes 1, 2, it freezes, and then it starts moving again. So basically it's moving more slowly than usual. Not only that, but if I finish the level, okay, nothing really interesting happens, but if I touch the gold tape and finish the level, the game crashes. Once again, it's because it's reading the linked slot. The gold tape uses the linked slot... Oh god, what is happening? The gold tape uses the mouth routine pointer as a as the slot or as like the Y position that you hit the gold tape at, or something like that. So if you hit it near the floor, it'll probably make Yoshi stick out his tongue. Okay, well it made him swallow something in that case. Oh god. A lot of weird stuff is happening. There we go. See, you can make him like swallow stuff. But anyway, that's pretty much everything, so thanks for watching. Sorry it's such a ridiculously long video, but I hope you enjoyed it. Bye!